Assalamu alaikum. I am Imam Tariq El-Amin, resident Imam of Masjid Al-Taqwa here on Chicago's southeast side of Chicago. On behalf of our Taleem committee, chaired by Dr. Aisha El-Amin, Dr. Gloria Bashir, Dr. Lionel Allen, and also Sister Rashida Fitzpatrick. Dr. Aisha El-Amin is the chair, and those folks, they work tirelessly to bring us great presentations. And today we are looking forward to listening to our brother Yunus Abdussabur to give us a presentation on the, all right, drum roll, wait for it. It is the Islamic science of alchemy. But before we do that, we want to remind you that you can find all of our past Taleems, our Juma khutbahs on YouTube, youtube.com/Masjid Al-Taqwa. We encourage you to subscribe and to share. And to get us started, we will start with the Surah Al-Fatiha, and I'll turn it over to our brother Yunus, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim. Ghayrul maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Ameen. All right. Our brother Yunus. All right, I'm going to pass it over to you now. Let me get myself out the way.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Trying to figure out how to share my screen here. I see. Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you so much to the whole Masjid Al-Taqwa community for being so welcoming and inviting me to give this talk about something that I've been studying for a long time and was not accidentally related to my becoming a Muslim, alhamdulillah. So I hope that everyone can find something of interest here, whether you identify as a Muslim or not. Any errors or faults are my own, and all the praise is for Allah. So without that, let's get started here. The title of my talk, as you can see, is the Islamic science of alchemy. The Arabic word here is Al-Kemy. Now, I'm sure a lot of you may have preconceptions about what exactly that means, probably something involving lead turning into gold. But I'm here to hopefully, inshallah, God willing, give kind of a deeper understanding of where this word comes from and all the various components of what it entails, of which the whole lead to gold thing is just one very minor facet. So to begin, I'll kind of just be walking through the historical, where this word comes from and what it means. Then I'll go into kind of the science of Islam and how using alchemy as a framework can help us understand certain verses from the Quran. And then at the end, inshallah, I will try to bring it back into the present day and think about, where this leaves us as people living in Chicago or just in the world of 2024, and how we can use alchemy from day to day. So, yeah. I guess to begin, I would just point out that there's kind of this separation that happened when alchemy was brought into the European context, where it got divided between alchemy and chemistry. But the word is the same in Arabic. Like if you look up chemistry in an Arabic dictionary, it's al-Kemiya, because al just means the. So it's like the chemistry, the Kemiya. But the separation between alchemy and chemistry, I think, has served to create well, I won't say too much about it, but I think it was a strategic decision at a certain point in history to create a sense that these are two separate things, when in reality they've always been one. So getting into a little bit of what is alchemy. At its most basic level, it is a sort of experimental science working with materials from the earth, and trying to understand what they're composed of and what sort of processes and transformations they're able to undergo. And the fact is, a lot of the science that we call chemistry comes from this experimentation that was being done, more than 1,000 years ago by Islamic polymaths and experimenters and theologians and astronomers and all these different fields. They were all understood as being part of a unified scientific endeavor. And I think one of the best proofs of this indebtedness that Western science has to the Islamic tradition is just in the language that we use. So, for example, the word al-imbik, which refers to this thing you see in the title slide, this sort of distiller apparatus. I think you can actually see in the upper left here, that is the word inbik, if I'm reading it correctly. The one dot is the N, and then the one dot below here is the B, and then the loopy thing with the two dots is the Q. And that word has come into English as the word alembic, which refers to this sort of distillery apparatus, which takes advantage of the different sorts of boiling points that different materials will have. And so if you boil one off while the others stay in the first chamber, then you can get a whole new material in the second chamber here. So probably the most famous example of what can come out of an alembic is alcohol or alcohol. Now, it may come as a surprise to some of you that alcohol was actually invented by Muslims. The word itself does not appear in the Quran. In what's prohibited in the Quran is wine, but it was these Muslim scholars 1,000 years ago who, experimenting, discovered that you could distill wine into a more concentrated sort of thing known as alcohol. And I would just point out that alcohol itself is not prohibited, but the consumption of it is. Whereas, for example, if you drive a vehicle, you may notice that when you go to the gas pump, it says something like 15% of this gas may be ethanol or some sort of plant product. So that is a sort of alcohol that you're using to fuel your vehicle. And then kind of the the third word that I would point out here that I think most speakers of English have heard before is al-iksir, which is elixir. And that is kind of the final product of an alchemical process is the elixir, with all of its sort of medicinal and spiritual ramifications that we'll get into in a little bit here. But I would just point out, getting back to this separation that happened between alchemy and chemistry, that if you think about the alcohol and the elixir industries, and I would consider pharmaceuticals the sort of modern day elixirs, these powders and pills that people take to make themselves feel a certain type of way. These are enormous industries, right? Alcohol, just the spirits, the quote unquote spirits, the distilled wines are a $500 billion industry every year. That's revenues worldwide. And pharmaceuticals are $1.5 trillion of revenue worldwide. So obviously the chemical processes that are underlying these things are extremely relevant to our global economy and our everyday lives. But I think it's significant that, or at least I think you can understand the current relation that we have to these things in modernity with reference to this sort of separation that happened between alchemy and chemistry, where we think that it's just pure material chemistry that we can like fix our brain chemistry, right? People talk about that. So to give another example of alchemy in everyday life, here's something that you'll probably see if you go into a grocery store at any point over the summer. Some corn cobs. But where do these things come from? Right? Well, it turns out there's something called the agrochemical industry, which generates $250 billion in worldwide revenue every year. And that is what is allowing us to produce these sort of perfectly identical yellow corns that you see here. It's the genetically modified seeds that get planted It's the fertilizers that allow soils to support, maybe more corn than they would normally. And then it's all the herbicides and the pesticides that are used to make sure that people can meet their quotas and make their profits. But that's not all you see here. The corn, you don't just go and grab a corn with your hand, right? There's packaging, there's the styrofoam underneath it, and usually some sort of plastic cling wrap. And if you consider plastic as what's called the petrochemical industry, that's another $500 billion every year worldwide. And yeah, I don't need to tell anyone here just how much plastic is in pretty much everything we do. So all of this speaks to, I think, the worldly importance of chemistry and alchemy. Just to give people some context of what I'm talking about in terms of science. But I don't want to dwell on that. I do want to get back to Al-Kemy as this Islamic science. So to get at that, I think we should look at where the word chemistry actually comes from. Some people on the call may recognize this hieroglyphic. This is the word Kemet, which in hieroglyphics refers to the land along the Nile River. We use the word Egypt, but that actually comes from the Greek Egyptos. The people who were from there and ruled there for more than 3,000 years, they referred to their land as Kemet. And the word and that's the root of alchemy, is al-Kemet. And it's true that even in the early days of Islam, the epicenter of alchemy was in the land along the Nile. And they were drawing from a much older tradition, going back to the Hermetic and Gnostic traditions of early Christianity, as well as even further back to the whole apparatus of Egyptian science, or what's referred to in the Quran as the magic of the pharaoh. But what does the word Kemet actually mean? It turns out it means black. And the most obvious reference for that is the blackness of the soil along the Nile River, which is very much in stark contrast to the dry desert surrounding it, where all the tombs and the pyramids are. That blackness of the Nile River was very integral to life in the Kemetic world. It was the flooding of the river that kind of structured their calendar. And it was the magic of being able to grow enough food to support this, very very large and very enduring society. All of that came back to the land, and the land being good. And so that was alchemy, was keeping that land black. This is actually soil along the Amazon River, which is another sort of alchemy involving a charring process that goes back at least 10,000 years and accounts for, as you can see, this very deep black soil on top of this is clay here at the bottom. And this is part of what allows for the Amazon to be the sort of, it didn't just happen naturally. There were human inhabitants going back many, many millennia in the Amazon who were doing these sorts of alchemical, how would you say? I mean, you could call it science, for lack of a better word. And that's why the Amazon is the way it is today. But the blackness here is not only referring to the soil. I would point out blackness also is the color of space. And this image here is a black hole. It's an artist's rendition of a black hole, kind of being shot out of a galaxy that's creating a trail of stars in its wake. I don't really know how it does all that. I just thought it was pretty cool. But what I'm getting at here is the alchemy is not just about the earth, it's also about the heavens. So to get into that a little deeper, I would ask you to consider desire, specifically the words consider and desire, which come from the word for star. Consider is with the stars, and desire from desidare is from the stars. And in this sense, a friend pointed out to me recently something that the Imam, W.D. Muhammad, may Allah be pleased with him, pointed out about the Lord's Prayer, which I grew up reciting as a Christian. And the Lord's Prayer was given by Jesus, peace be upon him, to his followers so that they could have something to, recenter them and focus their religion and their spirituality. And one of the lines in that is, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Now, what the Imam W.D. Muhammad pointed out is that what's being discussed here is this kind of unity between the earth and the heaven, and how it is our task as human beings, within our human nature, to make the earth resemble the heavens. And what he said is that the reason we love to look at the sky and it brings us so much, serenity and awe, is because he listed three things. The heavens have beauty, they have order, and they have peace. Beauty, order, peace. And he interpreted this section of the Lord's Prayer to be a commandment to us that we should try to accomplish that sort of beauty, order, and peace here on earth, just as it is in heaven. So this brings us to my first Quranic interpretation from the chapter known as the Star, 53, I believe. And that begins, the first verse is, Wa najm iza hawa. Bismillah, sorry. And this is normally translated as by the star when it sets, or by the star when it falls. But I think in the context of the etymology I just shared, it would be fair to translate it as by the star when it desires, when the stars come down to earth. And here we start to get into maybe one of the more controversial parts of my talk, which is that a huge component of alchemy is astrology, or what we call astrology. And I would just point out that the distinction between astrology, which is kind of the woo-woo, my moon is in Taurus in the 5th house, and astronomy, which is the very hard scientific astrophysics study of, the creation of the cosmos. The division between those two things is, in my mind, very similar to the division between alchemy and chemistry. And it's worth asking where that division comes from and who exactly it's serving. But all that to say, to begin a chapter by saying by the star when it desires, is to raise the issue that, the way that we live our lives and have desires can in fact be in accordance with the structure of the stars. So I'll just leave that there for now. And what I want to kind of bring this all together to introduce what I would call the fundamental theory of alchemy, which is as above, so below. And this is a phrase that comes out of something known as the Emerald Tablet. And the exact translation here I'm getting from my friend Thomas Haroun. And in the Emerald Tablet, it reads, "Indeed, the above is like the below, and the below is like the above. Work wonders from one, as all things are from one, by one schema." And so the emphasis there is on oneness, right? In Islam, we call this tawheed, the oneness of creation, the oneness of Allah. It's a very important part of our faith. And in that sense, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to suggest that the person who the creator of you is also the creator of all the stars. And in that sense, it's almost questioning the power of Allah, gloried on high, that Allah would not be able to create us and our world in a way that the stars could be speaking for us, or that the stars could have signs for us, right? We wouldn't say that the stars are themselves influencing our lives, because that would be a form of idolatry. But I think we are capable as Muslims of recognizing that the stars are there, and they may be a sign for us. So the figure you see on the left here is, I've written his name here, Jabir ibn Hayyan. This is a European Renaissance rendition of him. You see the name here is translated as Geber, Geber. And you know, he looks like the classic wizard figure. I think it's my friend Thomas also asked, you know, why do we associate wizards with beards? It's another one of these, like, you know, maybe traces of Islam in the Western imagination. But the reason I have the image here is because you see he's got one finger pointed to the earth and one finger pointed to the heavens. So it's this unity of as above, so below. And you can see that here, pretty much his exact figure down to the red and white robe being distilled in the tarot card known as the Magician. So here you kind of see the genealogy of Western European occultism being drawn out from that Islamic context and being given its own structure. So I just want to really focus on this idea that as above, so below is kind of everything you need to know about alchemy, at least in its short version. So building out from that, I like to go back to the Quran. And here is an ayah from the chapter which I take my name from, Yunus, Jonas, peace be upon him. And this is actually an ayah that has been discussed in a few of the sermons recently at our masjid. I know Imam Rabbani just spoke on it, I think, in the second or third week of Ramadan. If anyone wants to go check out that kupa, it was great. And I'll read it just briefly here. Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Who made the sun a glowing and the moon a light, and decreed for it phases that you may know number for the years and the account. Allah creates that not but in reality, detailing the verses for people who know. So I just want to point out two things here that I bolded. The first is this word, the account, al-hisbanna or al-hisaba, excuse me, al-hisaba. I think it's significant that it's given as a second thing on top of the number for the years. Oftentimes it'll be just translated as the number of the years and their count, but you know, that's kind of redundant, right? And the Quran does not have any spare words. So the second word, al-hisaba, it's related to the phrase hasbunallah, which you may have heard. It means Allah is sufficient. And I think it gets at maybe the deeper meaning of what the sun and the moon are there for. Right? If you accept my earlier statement that the stars may be a sign for us, then certainly the sun and the moon as those heavenly bodies which we interact with most frequently, right? Certainly there is some sort of sign in there. And so they're giving us a way not just to keep the time, right? Not just to construct a calendar, but also to have an account for what is happening. And in fact, what is happening in reality. Bihaq is the word here. In truth, in reality, it's not just that the sun and the moon really exist, but that they, in relation to us, they can inform us about our reality, about the truth of our world. And then this word given for the verses, al-ayah, verses of the Quran, it also means signs, right? So these are signs that are being detailed. And in that sense, the sun and the moon are verses or signs, just like the verses of the Quran are signs for us. And so Allah, gloried on high in his mercy, has given detail to these signs, right? It's not just that the sun and the moon exist, but that there are very specific processions and transformations that they go through, which we can understand as signs in trying to live our own lives in a way that is more fitting with our human nature as being part of this wider nature of the cosmos. So to think a little deeper about what are these signs of the sun and the moon, and how do we take account for them? How do we account for them in our own daily life? I would say as Muslims, we already practice a form of astrology every day by making our salat prayer. Right? The salat is determined by the phases of the sun. And what I've done here is put an image of the salat calendar, right? Sunrise on the left, noon at top. I was late today because I was making my noon prayer, and then sunset over on the right. You can understand this in astrological terms through with the houses here of the chart. So if you've ever heard someone say, you know, I've got Venus in the first house, right? That means that Venus was just below the horizon at the time of their birth. So in that sense, we make our dawn prayer as the sun is moving through the first house. When the sun leaves the first house and enters the 12th house, that's when fasting begins during Ramadan. When the sun moves from the 10th into the 9th house, that's our noon prayer. When it is in the 8th house, that's when we make our afternoon prayer, you know, and so on and so forth. So at a very basic level, I would say you are doing astrology if you're observing Salat, although again, this might be a little controversial. Um, I think it's also worth considering what Salah is. What is the structure of Salah? You know, at its most basic physical level, it's a form of stretching. But what does it mean to stretch? We're stretching our body not only to keep it flexible, but we're literally stretching it from the heavens to the earth, right? When you stand up with your back straight, that's the closest you'll be to the heavens. And when you fall down in submission, that's the closest you'll be to the earth. And so in that sense, the very, you know, just watching someone make salah, you start to see this principle of tawheed and being expressed in the alchemical sense of as above, so below. So that's on the sun side of things. Then thinking about the moon, another pillar of our religion is the fasting during the month of Ramadan. And that is determined by the phases of the moon. Ramadan is a month. As Muslims, we use a lunar calendar. And what this picture here is actually one I took on my phone on the first night of Ramadan. You can see the crescent here very clearly, even on my not great phone quality. Over here on the right, for those who might not recognize it, that is Masjid Al-Taqwa, where I pray and where I was going that night for my nightly prayers. These are the dogs at the bottom. If any of you have ever gone through the alleys, I'm sure you've met these dogs. They're very aggressive. And you know, it's interesting. There was actually some disagreement this year, and I've heard it's like this most years, where a lot of people in our city started fasting a day before we did at Masjid Al-Taqwa because they were not actually looking for the moon. They were just following what the officials in Saudi Arabia were saying would be the first day of Ramadan. But I think it's significant that in our congregation, in our community, we actually need to see the moon before we start fasting. Because again, we have a sort of astrological sensibility that we're not just doing it because some other human told us to do. It's because we have received a sign from the heavens that it's time to begin fasting. So this was the first day of Ramadan. This is a photo I took from one of the last days of Ramadan during the total solar eclipse. I took the train down to Carbondale so that I could see it. Alhamdulillah. And what you see here is it looks like it's sunset, right? You can see on the horizon just a faint glow, but that's actually the sun at the top of the image there. It was very surreal. I'm very thankful that I was able to make it. And I would just point out that it's something of a wonder that we even have total solar eclipses. This is an image of an eclipse of Mars. And as you can see, the moon does not come close to obscuring the whole planet. This was taken in February of this year, just a couple months ago, by a NASA probe that's out there. You know, so we could have easily had a moon that was like this, that would not allow us to observe a total solar eclipse. But that's not what we have. This is what we have. This is an image taken by a friend of mine in the Chicago Astronomical Society, who would be very angry about what I'm saying about astrology now, but that's okay. He takes great pictures, and as you can see, you know, this is a truly glorious sort of thing that, as Muslims, I think it's another clear proof to us that our Creator is one and had the power to create us not only with an Earth that is the correct distance from the sun, that it can have an atmosphere and that it can support life, but also that it would have a moon that is so perfectly distanced and so perfectly shaped that at certain times they completely line up, and we have this sort of surreal experience of the total solar eclipse. So going back to the Quran now, one of my favorite chapters here is the sun, and I think it brings together a lot of what I'm saying about the sun and the moon. I'll read it here. Bismillah. By the sun and its shining, and the moon as recites it, and the day as displays it, and the night as occults it, and the sky and what bore it, and the earth and what laid it, and the soul and what leveled it. So there's some very clear oppositions being introduced here between the sun and the moon, the day and the night, the sky and the earth. That is a lot of what I've been talking about, the heavens and the earth having a unity, the sun and the moon having a unity. Here, I love this image that kind of maps this onto the most famous icon of Chinese alchemy, which is the yin yang. Yin meaning the up, the heaven, yang meaning the ground, the earth, the hot and the cold, right? And here you see them expressed in terms of the sun and the moon. The sun being the source of our light, but actually a light that you cannot look at directly unless there's an eclipse. And the moon being what receives that light, and a light for us in the night sky, which again, you only see the stars come out in the night sky when the sun has already set. So there's a balance and a unity to all of these things. So I share this chapter because I love it, of course, but also because I would point out, I think it's significant the way there are 7 ayah here leading up to the soul. And it's the soul which breaks the even pairs of, sun, moon, day, night, sky, earth, that you have 6 there. And then the 7th is the soul. And now we start to get into how does understanding all this about alchemy affect us as human beings? And what does it say about our human nature, about our souls? And so I especially with these last 3, the sky, the earth, and the soul, I think it's somewhat clear that the soul is that the human soul specifically is the thing that unites all of these. And going back to the Imam Muhammad's interpretation of the Lord's Prayer, on earth as it is in heaven, that is part of our task as the stewards of this, tremendous reality that we inhabit, that we have to somehow bring together the heavens and the earth and make it heaven on earth. I also think the number 7 is very significant, and I'll use that as an excuse to play one of my favorite songs, which is Miles Davis' 7 Steps to Heaven. And while you listen, I'll just play a minute of it here, but I want you to think about what are the 7 steps to heaven. I would remind you that the Fatiha, which Imam Tariq opened us with, and which we recite every time we stand up to pray, the Fatiha has 7 verses, right? And maybe those are the 7 steps to heaven, or whatever it may be. But without further ado. Okay, I don't know if you all were able to hear that. Sorry.
It's a little choppy.
Okay. Well, I invite you all to go listen to it on your own because it's a great song. But yes, what are the 7 steps to heaven? So far as I know, Miles Davis was not himself a Muslim, although I think he may have had a much more successful career if he was. But he obviously was exposed to some idea of the 7 heavens. which is something that comes up a lot in the Quran. And I would just like to point to one specific place that it shows up that I discovered recently, which is in the chapter called the divorce. And this is the last verse of that chapter. It's a very short chapter. And sorry, I didn't mention it before, but all these translations, unless otherwise noted, are my own. So again, the fault is with me, and the praise is for Allah. And this one reads, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah, the one that creates 7 skies and of the earth their likeness. So there's lots of references to the 7 heavens in the Quran, and there's lots of references to the creator of the heaven, what is in the heavens and what is in the earth. But this is one of the only places I found where it refers to the earth also having 7 dimensions, like the sky, or that, and it even goes further to say that there are 7 skies, and in the earth, there is the likeness of those 7 skies. So now we're getting a little deeper into what is the science of alchemy. So specifically, there are correspondences which have been drawn between the 7 heavens, being the 7 planets, and the 7 elements, which are listed here. And some of these are maybe intuitive. The moon being silver, the moon is silver, right? The sun being gold. They also share a color. Mercury and Mercury, they just have the same name. But also Mercury as a planet moves very quickly. The metal Mercury is called Quicksilver because it moves more than any other metal. One thing I would point out about Mars and iron is that the reason Mars as a planet is red is the same reason your blood is red, which is that it has iron in it. The whole surface of Mars is iron oxide, rusted iron, and that's why it has that rust red color. So even in just being able to see the redness of Mars in the sky is a testament to the fact that these physical laws apply just as much in the heavens as they do here on Earth. But to get into what is the spiritual significance of these correspondences and what can they kind of do for us in the modern day and age, I want to introduce 2 kind of popular cultural figures that I have a feeling most people here will have at least heard of, which I see as our modern day alchemists. So the first one is Harry Potter. There are 7 books in the Harry Potter series, which I believe correspond to the 7 metals being transformed from lead into gold. And in that sense, the alchemist journey is just it's adolescence, right? It's Harry turning from a boy into a man, or from a muggle into a wizard, however you want to understand it. But it's those 7 steps to heaven again. The first book was actually called The Philosopher's Stone, which is a translation of the elixir, elixir. If you look up Philosopher's Stone, you'll just find stuff about European occult alchemy. It was pretty explicitly drawn from that whole reservoir. And so in this sense, if you grew up reading Harry Potter, you were being exposed to a lot of alchemical concepts, just maybe not with those explicit terms, but they still very much are prevalent in popular culture. Another example of this would be Sun Ra, who, in 1950s Southside Chicago, stopped being Herman Blunt and took on this name for himself, Sun Ra, which is obviously getting into the Kemetic dimension of Ra being the sun to Kemet, Sun Ra. But I think it's interesting that he claimed that he was from the planet Saturn, which, a lot of people kind of dismiss that as him just being a kooky guy because, we're pretty sure he was from Alabama. But I think there's an alchemical dimension to this. If you understand Saturn as being the planet of lead, it's the largest, it moves the slowest. And him coming from the planet Saturn and ending up as Sun Ra is him kind of claiming to have made this spiritual transformation, undergoing a chemical process in himself of turning lead into gold. And you can see he's very much decked out here in gold with the Kemetic hieroglyphs on his dress there. And yeah, I could go a lot deeper into the relationship between Ra, Amen-Ra, and alchemy. But I fear I won't have enough time, so maybe I can leave that for the questions. Um, so with that context, I want to return to the Quran, and think about how we might be able to use this whole framework of alchemy to maybe dig into and decipher some of the more mysterious or enigmatic verses that we find in the Quran. So I've chosen two here from the chapter The Cave, the 18th chapter, which Masjid al-Taqwa, in fitting with the recommendation of our Prophet Muhammad, prayers and peace be upon him, we read this every week on Thursday nights. And so the cave is a very, very important chapter that we're supposed to return to constantly. And what I pulled out here is two places where it refers to these sort of metals in a way that's never really explained, and me personally have always been a bit intrigued by. The first one is in the story of Dul Qarnayn, the one of two horns. And the Dul Qarnayn is a king who comes to the people of Earth and builds them a wall. And specifically here you see it says, give me, Bismillah, give me sheets of iron until when he'd leveled between the two fronts, these two mountainsides. He said, blow until when he made it fire. He said, give me to pour on it copper. So we're told that the wall of Dul Qarnayn is constructed from iron and copper. At an earlier point in the cave, it's discussing the gardens of paradise, which are promised to those who work righteousness and believe in this life as something for the hereafter. And it says, those for whom are gardens of Eden, with rivers flowing underneath, they will take for ornaments bracelets of gold and will wear garments of green silk. So we have these two images of a wall built of iron and copper, and then bracelets of gold and garments of green silk. So what does that mean? How do we interpret this or use this sign, this verse from the Quran, you know, with the help of alchemy? That's kind of the question I want to raise, and hopefully, inshallah, I'll get to in my remaining time here. So to do that, I want to make reference to another part of the Quran, the chapter known as Saba. And I would just point out that the opening verses of Saba are extremely alchemical. I've just selected two of them to highlight it, but they really all are about this sort of concept. The second verse says, Allah knows what goes into the earth and what comes out of it, and what descends from the sky and what ascends to it. So again, the unity of earth and heaven, as above, so below. And I would just point out, you don't even have to necessarily be a person of faith or believing in the oneness of Allah to recognize the wonder of the fact that, you know, I have a phone here, and I'm guessing most of you do too, in your pocket or something, that phone is just minerals taken out of the earth, and it vibrates in just a certain way that it can, you know, shoot this information up to satellites, which also came out of the earth and which are now, while I speak, circling the earth. And those satellites will beam back information that can tell you exactly where you are and how you need, you know, how to get to where you want to be. And you can look up anything you could think of, right? All of this is happening, coming out of the earth, going up into the sky, coming back down. It's truly magical if you just consider it as a whole system. And the Quran is just telling us that Allah knows all of that. He knows who dug the minerals in your phone and in your computer, and if you have an electric vehicle in the battery, he knows where it came from better than we ever will. And you know, there's a lot of ethical considerations around that, right? I don't know how much you all have read into the sources for these precious minerals that we use, but most of them come from Africa. And there's a great deal of political instability and suffering that is a result of these precious minerals needing to be mined at a certain dollar figure to preserve profit levels. And I'm not saying, you know, we should all throw our phones out, but it's good to be aware, even if you aren't a Muslim, just as an ethical individual, you know, to be aware of where they're coming out of the earth, and what you're sending into space. And to that point, the ninth verse here reads, "Do they not see what is before and what is behind them of the sky and earth? If we willed, we may cause the earth to swallow them, or let fall on them fragments of the sky." So to my mind, this is just saying the perfect balance and unity and harmony that we experience between the earth and the heaven is itself a kind of mercy. And we should always be thankful for that, and remember that, the earth could just swallow us up, or an asteroid could come kill us, like they say it did the dinosaurs. But with all that context, I want to get back to this question of iron and copper, and specifically the way they're associated with the prophets David and Solomon, peace be upon them. So reading it here, "And indeed we gave Dawood from us bounty, O mountains, resound with him, and the birds, and we made gentle for him iron, that you make full coats, and decree in the links, and work righteousness. Surely I am for what you do, the seer. And to Suleiman we made flow an eye of copper." So here we see iron and copper being very explicitly associated with these two prophets, who were also kings, who were also father and son. You see the mountains and the birds, which mountains are where minerals come out of. Birds fly in the heavens. There's this unity that's being expressed by Dawood, alayhi salam. But what's being said about the iron is that he fashioned it into chainmail, right? Iron, you could say, is used for swords. It's used for guns. It's associated with war for all that reason. But what's being attributed to Dawood here is the links in the chain that create a protective shield for someone who wears chainmail. And then with Suleiman, what's being associated is the eye of copper. This is usually translated as a wellspring or a fount. The word itself is ayn here, which means eye. And that can mean well, in the sense of the oasis, the wellspring in the desert, is known as the eye of the desert. But it's literally the eye, which, if you consider the relationship between copper and Venus, Venus being a planet of beauty and relation, Suleiman is kind of that balancing of his own father, his father David having to go to war with Goliath and establish the kingdom, the Khalifa. Solomon inherited that and provided a sort of balance by bringing in the importance of beauty, and that's why one of the most famous stories of Solomon is his kind of romance with the queen of Saba, which is the name of this chapter, and made most famous in the Song of Solomon, which is in the Old Testament, and is also a Toni Morrison novel. Just before the Song of Solomon is the Psalms, which are attributed to David. And going back to the cave now, I would point out that the word used for sheets of iron, zubara, is also the word to refer to the Psalms as scriptures. So I would argue this kind of strengthens the association between iron and David. And it also gives us a kind of spiritual interpretation of what the sheets of iron, the scriptures of iron, that were laid by the Dul Qarnayn as a king himself. Right? It's not just the strength of iron as a metal, but it's also the way that the Psalms are able to bring us together in rejoiceful prayer, and to link us like chains, or like links in a chain, and to create that strength between us, like a wall, right? When we stand up to pray, we create that wall. There's not supposed to be any space between those in the ranks. But on top of that, the sheets, the scriptures of iron, is the copper, which is a kind of necessary balance to it. So I think seeing these metals in terms of the prophets and what the prophets represent can help us understand how building that sort of wall in this world, in the dunya, can help us to achieve the ornaments of gold in the afterlife. That's kind of what we're earning, that we don't need gold and silver as material wealth in this life so much as we need to build the things which will earn us them in the hereafter. And I would just make one point here that the word translated as bracelet is asawira, which is the same root as surah, which means chapter, as in surahs of the Quran, chapters of the Quran. So in this sense, I think it would be justified to understand the bracelets of gold are like those surahs of the Quran, each one of which contains, a kind of perfection and a kind of totality, that as we pray and learn and memorize and recite these surahs of the Quran, we are, earning those bracelets of gold in the afterlife. So I have just a little under 10 minutes here. And I want to try to land this plane and, bring it back down to earth, no pun intended, by discussing something that's very, very relevant to specifically where our mosque is located. Now, what I have here, does anyone happen to recognize this? What this depicts as a process?
Forging, not forging, that's like steel, the Bessemer
Yes.
process.
Bessemer, thank you, Bessemer. So who is Bessemer? I don't really need to get into that right now, but I will point out that if you just walk 15 minutes north of our masjid here, you will find something called Bessemer Park, named after the guy who invented this. And yes, I'm reminded that our Imam Tariq is himself an iron worker. So I'm sure I think it's extremely relevant in this context. Now we have Bessemer Park in our neighborhood because going back 100 years, this part of Chicago and Northwest Indiana was the largest steel producer on the planet. And so in that sense, a lot of the economy and social life here is related to this alchemy that is about purifying iron into steel. It's an alchemical process of, you fire it up really hot like dual carnine, and you let air through there, and then you can get a purified iron known as steel. But what you're left with is something called slag. And if you go, 10 or 15 minutes south of the mosque here, you end up here it's called Vets Park, but people from around the area will know that this is known as Slag Valley. And we don't have valleys in Chicago because we don't have hills, but there has been so much slag built up around here that there's a whole neighborhood known as Slag Valley that was kind of caught between the steelworks. And here I would just return to the fact that the ayah of the Quran, which I noted references the unity of the 7 heavens and the 7 earths, is from a chapter known as divorce. And in that sense, we're not just talking about the divorce between, human husband and wife, but we're also talking about the separation of the earth into these discrete metals and the sorts of care that we have to show as Muslims in that process of divorcing the iron from the lead, in this case, the steel from the slag. And by and large, the science in this area has not done that. It has not been careful. And that's why we have more lead in our water and our soil than any other part of the city, and all the health effects that come along with that. I don't want to dwell on that too much. I just want to make it a point that we are living in this world that is created by a certain kind of chemistry. And as a final note, I just want to give a suggestion of what a new kind of alchemy could be that would help us, earn our golden bracelets, so to speak. And that is right here in Steelworkers Park, not too far from the mosque. I would encourage everyone to go check it out at some point. This was the location of Southworks, where I'm sure some members of our mosque worked at some point. It was really dominated the local economy. The U.S. Steelworks here, and everything you see here is actually lead. Like this was not land until U.S. Steel came and started making steel. And when they had the slag lead left over, they would just dump it into the water. They called it reclaiming the shoreline, and they would just create new land that was pure lead, and then they would build more mills on top of that. And then they just left, and we have to deal with it. But praise be to Allah, in the last 10 years, part of this region has been transformed into a park called Steelworkers Park, where they did a certain type of alchemy, mixing biosolids from the Metropolitan Water District with imported soil, and basically laid enough ground on top of the lead that now, as you see here, it's been greened with grass, and they left one wall of the steel mill here as a climbing wall. And again, if any of you haven't been here and are in the area, I would highly encourage you to go check it out. But basically, what I want to kind of get to is, our responsibility as Muslims in this area. We should be pushing to have these sorts of spaces everywhere and be transforming the lead of slag into the gold of the gardens of paradise. So I think with that, I'm about at time. So I want to just kind of open it up. I'm sure people have questions, but thank you again so much for giving me this platform. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed it.
I'm going to just start with one thing. I'm going to say, wow to you, Brother Yunus. Alhamdulillah, that was tremendously informative. And I don't know if you were, and also, you threw some humor in there as well. Yeah, you gave a whole lot to really think about, and the shame is, we're close to, it's time to shut it down. We almost need a part two to really get into a conversation about what you presented.
For sure.
I love because these Arabic words are so rich, and but how you went back to with I believe that was it Najm or Shams? But anyway, the consider is with the stars and desire from the stars.
Najm, yes.
Najm. Yeah, this idea of bringing, Tawheed, as it is above, as it is, so shall it be below. The yin and the yang, these universal principles. Man, just so much. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I think I'm actually going to go back and watch this again.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much.
Yes. Does anybody else have? Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. Alhamdulillah, I feel smarter after
right
after telling. So, alhamdulillah, thank you. May Allah continue to bless you to share knowledge and increase us in knowledge. Thank you.
Let me add my voice, Brother Yunus, to your presentation. You covered a lot of ground, and I think it is important what Imam Tariq mentioned, and that is perhaps a part two. But what you reminded me of was that how important it is that we keep our feet on the ground, particularly around as above, so below. And I wanted to make a comment regarding as above in terms of the sky, and we're talking about as you were presenting the sky of our human nature, and also as below, it reminded me of the practical life that we have to live as human beings, and that we keep that balance. The last thing I wanted to mention, and it reminded me of the history of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, where the Quraysh and others were trying to get him to give up what he was teaching regarding Tawheed and the oneness of Allah. And he told them, you can give me the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, and I will not give up one iota of what I'm preaching. And I remember the Imam Muhammad, Rahimahullah alayhi, referring to the sun as, you can give me the social sciences in my right hand, and moon, you can give me the spiritual sciences in my left, and I will not give up any of what Allah has blessed me to convey to you as his messages, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Alhamdulillah,
Thank
alhamdulillah.
you.
Allahu
Thank
Akbar.
you.
That was beautiful. Yes. I got to say something also. I got in here late to listen, but I'm glad I got in, period. You touched on a lot of stuff that I'm familiar with and reading and reciting. And some of my favorite stuff is Shams. That's one of my favorite surahs I learned. One of them is one I learned first, in its entirety. But I wanted to say, yes, subhanAllah wa bihamdi. You touched on quite a bit of stuff that I really want to comment on, but we ain't got a lot of time to do all of that. So you definitely got to come back with some stuff another time, to inform us, to enlighten us, and share with us what you've come up with. Okay.
And inshallah, I would be honored to.
Inshallah ta'ala, kulli shay'in alim. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Rahmatullah.
Alhamdulillah. I'm going to ask Dr. Aisha and the rest of the Taleem committee, please make that happen so that we can have a part 2 to really engage with the content.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. So that being said, we want to thank our brother Yunus again for his presentation. May Allah continue to guide you, to increase you in knowledge and in your ability to share, right? That's why we take it on. We take it on so that we can share.
That's right.
And
So, beloved Muslims, again, I remind you, if you are not following us on YouTube, do so. Subscribe to the channel, share the content. Today is just another example of so many examples before it of the wealth of information and talent that resides in this community. So please do subscribe, like, and share. And with that, we are going to close out with Surah Al-Asr. And inshallah, we will see you again for our next Taleem next week. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawassaw bil haqqi wa tawassaw bis sabr. Amen.